Hello everybody, it is Jack from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. And if you guys are looking for PTC geocodes, make sure you check out the Poketown store, where you can use the code OmniPoke for an extra 5% off your order. Today we're going to be looking at the Players' Cup Top 16 decks. Obviously this tournament was held on the 29th of August, so a little over a week ago. It was actually played around a week before, so these decks aren't completely fresh. We've had a couple of tournaments since, but we wanted to take a look at some of the archetypes that sort of led us into this format, as well as seeing how they've evolved over the past couple of weeks. Obviously, as we know, there's been a variety of tournaments, online tournaments, multiple different people with online circuits, and I really implore you to check those tournaments out. But today we wanted to take a look at the decks that did well, and kicking things off, we're going to be taking a look at Metalization. So yeah, Metalization was the deck that won the tournament overall. You can see down here that both Jack Miller and Matthew Burris placed first and second with the exact same 60s, so obviously a very, very strong 60. First things first, I think the deck is still pretty strong. Interestingly, the biggest inclusion of their lists was the 2/2 Bronzong line, as well as double Zamazenta, to try and deal with or wall against a couple of really, really key decks in this format. Zamazenta being really useful against Eternatus VMAX, and Bronzong obviously having that heat-proof ability that stops all fire Pokemon from attacking it, or it prevents all damage done to it by fire Pokemon. So that's really good for things like Baby Blounds and the Centiskorch matchup. So yeah, really, really interesting inclusion. Obviously, now this is a really, really key tech for their deck and that matchup, but now this is a bit more commonplace. I actually think Bronzong has got a lot weaker. I think Centiskorch decks can quite easily play things such as Dubwolls V, such as Cramorant V, and in general should be fairly okay at dealing with double Bronzong. So I think going forward, Luca Metal lists like this either have to cut down to like 0 Bronzong, no Bronzors, no Bronzong, and probably cutting the communications for some other more consistency cards, force tag call, more supporters, things like that. And just saying, yeah, I'm probably going to be rolled by the fire matchups, but I'm going to have more consistency in all other matchups. Or I feel like the Bronzong line has to be bumped up to a 3/3 line, basically to be able to deal with whatever your opponent has chosen to be their Bronzong counter, i.e. again, Dubwool, Cramorant, and that kind of thing. Because you have to expect that your opponent is going to be able to probably gust and kill a Bronzor early, unless you're able to evolve it on the first turn of the game with the evolutionary advantage ability. You're going to assume they're going to be able to probably deal with the Bronzor when it comes down. More and more lists are playing 3, even 4 boss now. So in general, one's going to go down, you'll get your second Bronzong out, and that Bronzong will be dealt with by Cramorant, Dubwool, whatever counter they're playing. If you're then able to respond with a Zacian to knock out that counter, dropping down another Bronzong, that third line can then lock up the game. Obviously, that does, you do run into space issues. You need to find another 2 spaces in this list. This list is already playing the full 4 communication, which is nice. I think that's key when you're playing this Bronzong line, just because it's so important in the matchups it's important in. You have to be able to find it. But yeah, that's how I see Bronzong being in Luca Metal for the next couple of weeks. It's one of those tech inclusions that's added in to deal with certain decks of the meta. When people see its popularity, they start countering it. People stop playing it, they stop countering it, and then it's good again. So I think for the next couple of weeks, you've either got to go feast or famine with the Bronzong, either sack off and give up the fire matchups, or really lean into them and say, you're not winning because I'm playing the 3/3 Bronzong. I think 2/2 is way more susceptible to being countered with like a single Dubwool or a single Cramorant and that kind of thing. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure after testing it as well, the Bronzong feels really, really strong in the games. It feels in the games where they don't have a counter, but any counter that they may play, it feels like it's pretty much the writing's on the wall for the Bronzong. So in general, other than that, the list is pretty simple. A lot of 4-ofs, just making sure we get these metal Pokemon out. Obviously 4 Saucer, 4 Goggles to really try and reduce that damage. In combination with the Luca Metal GX attack, we've got the Tag Call package, obviously great for searching out the Luca Metal early on, as well as the double Malolana, meaning that you have a lot of inbuilt healing after you've been reducing 30, even 60 damage per turn. And yeah, nothing too sparkly about the list, just really, really consistent. Lots of 4-ofs, just trying to outgrind the opponent. Double Zamazenta, meaning that Eternatus really has to find a lot of answers. Things like one Sableye may not be enough because the Sableye can be responded on with a Zacian, so they're going to have to run more answers, more Spiritombs, more Hoopers, that kind of thing, just to try and get through the Zamazenta as the Eternatus player. So yeah, really, really strong list. I really like the list, to be honest. I think the Bronzong was a perfect tech call for that tournament. I now think they're a little bit weaker for now until the hype of Bronzong dies down. But yeah, really, really strong list. Congratulations to Jack and Matthew, who I know worked very hard on this list. And yeah, really, really cool to see this archetype doing well. Again, that was the second place list as well. It was a mirror match in the final. So onto the third place list, Victor Freitas, who's playing ADP Zacian. A pretty interesting list again, to be honest. There's a couple of card inclusions that I wouldn't have expected in ADP Zacian. In general, Pokemon looking fairly standard. It's not a Jirachi-based build. It's also got the double Zamazenta, again, trying to wall against some of the Eternatus decks. Can be really, really strong. Double Zamazenta, especially if you start Zamazenta, just getting 2 Zamazentas out can actually just close out the game immediately in some cases, if the Eternatus player isn't playing enough answers for the Dauntless Shield. So yeah, double Zamazenta was, again, a really nice inclusion for this tournament. The Pokemon list is pretty standard. No Duraludon, no counter to things like Decidueye. You have things like Guru, of course, but in general, no super good counter to Decidueye. Again, maybe thinking it was a non-factor. This was only a 16-player tournament, so you have to think about how the tech inclusions and what cards you want to play very differently than if you're going into, say, one of the bigger tournaments, like an 1,000-person online tournament or anything like that. You have to really think about your cards very differently. The two most interesting cards to me are this one Reds Challenge and this one Capture Energy. The Reds Challenge can be really good for finding things like Saucer on the right turn, finding that great catcher, as well as having supplementary 3 boss, being able to Reds Challenge, discarding some energy for Metal Sources, things like that, to be able to find some of these more key cards. I can see the synergy, but I think in general, personally, the one Marnie count scares me, so I would personally probably just bump that up to a second Marnie because I'm a huge Marnie gamer. I think Marnie is such a strong supporter. But I get the synergy between Res Challenge and a lot of these different sort of things. Res Challenge also in combination with Crobat works as a pseudo draw supporter anyway. As well as the Capture Energy. Now the Capture Energy is really interesting to me. ADP is a deck that is so reliant on getting energy attachment on ADP turn 1. It has to be a Metal Energy or a Water Energy, or in this case Aurora. It's so important to get that energy turn 1. So to me, it's really, really interesting that the Capture Energy was included because it's not ever a particularly good target on turn 1, I feel. Especially with no E-switches in the list either, so you can't even attach it turn 1 because you know next turn you can Metal Saucer, attach Aurora, E-switch off the Metal that you've Saucered and still get the turn 2 Auto Creation. It feels like if you hit the Capture Energy turn 1, you're settling for no Auto Creation until turn 3, which is crazy to me because I think Auto Creation is obviously so important. It's caused a lot of controversy over the past few weeks. So yeah, the Capture Energy is really interesting to me. One of the only synergies I can see with it is that scenario where you do get 2 Zamazentas out and basically say, I don't think you have enough answers to Zamazenta V. And in that exact situation, I can see it being pretty good because you don't need to find... It's another Quick Ball or another Pokemon search card that could be searched with Guzhala or Tag Call. So for the exact situation where you want to go double Zamazenta, no other Pokemon, against like an Eternatus VMAX that isn't running any... or isn't running enough Pokemon to be able to deal with Zamazenta, I can see it being useful in exactly that situation, but I'm not too much of an advocate of it myself. I don't remember whether this tournament was open deck list or not. Someone will have to let me know down in the comments, but also if it was open deck list, that does make the whole Zamazenta, double Zamazenta plan a little bit stronger because you can see exactly whether your opponent can deal with 2 Zamazentas or not. But yeah, other than that, list is pretty straightforward. We've got the Tag Call package rather than the Basic Energy package, meaning that we can run a few of these tools, which was interesting. We have the Single Swell. Single Swell is always a bit scary, especially when I feel like you have to discard, you have to hold so much in this format, or you have to use so much in this format to be able to Crobat for large amounts of cards, things like that, that sometimes I've found when playing the Tag Call engine, that you had to discard the swell before you could put it into play because you needed an extra card to discard. But nonetheless, with this no energy switch build, I can actually see it being a bit better because you're not as focused on digging through the deck turn 1 to find that turn 1 altered creation. You can quite happily build it up over 2 turns, so there's less need for you to just bin everything in your hand and therefore not be able to get value out of the swell. You can quite happily just swell and hold your hand for a while. So the one swell is a bit scary, but I don't mind it. The one giant bomb is something me and Joe were really testing at the start of this format. Giant bomb ADP was a lot of fun, and it was our way of dealing with Eternatus VMAX, being able to giant bomb your ADP so that if they hit it, they were then in range of a Zacian to take 4 prizes on them. So yeah, giant bomb was a really cool inclusion. It's really nice to see. It was only the single copy. I think we were playing double bomb, but regardless, it's really good to see this pretty unique card seeing play. I like it a lot. Double metal goggles as well, really interesting just for trying to preserve the Zacian and Zamazenta in the matchups that they're key for. And then just the pretty standard tackle package to Gushala, 1 Sinlin, 1 Mallow, or Mallow Lana. 3 boss and a great catcher, pretty standard nowadays, sometimes even 4 boss. The full 4 tag call package, just a super consistent list when it comes to just finding the Pokemon you need. So yeah, pretty interesting list. Again, I'm not personally sold on the Reg Challenge and the Capture Energy, but I can see their niche uses, so maybe they were useful overall. Rounding out top 4 was Tord playing Inteleon Frosmoth, one of the wackier decks of the tournament. He spoke about this on one of his streams lately, about how the numbers for this deck are really strong against things like Zacian and Eternatus, and I can see it, in all honesty, it's a pretty favourable damage trade when you're doing 160 plus 60 for 3 energy on a 320 HP Pokemon. Zacians are going to struggle to knock this out, as are Eternatus, so this is usually getting 2 max bullets off, and that is 440 damage for 3 energy, which is super efficient, really strong damage output. And yeah, other than that, it's just a very standard Tord list, a lot of consistency, a lot of answers for things so he doesn't auto lose to anything. The Suicune, really important for being able to deal with Decidueyes, so you're not completely reliant on things like Frosmoth to deal with Decidueyes, because obviously that's never going to work. So yeah, Suicune are really nice Decidueye counter if it is necessary, as well as just having a 1 energy attacker, and the Lapras being a pretty strong Zamazenta counter in combination with the Zigzagoons to be able to actually one-shot Zamazentas if they don't have any buffs on them. So you're not walled by Zamazenta by this deck as well, though you can still attack with Inteleon as well. But yeah, in general, there's not much to say about this list. It's just very Tord, very consistent, looking to get that game plan off every single game. Double Dedenne, double Crobat, supplementing that 3-2 Frosmoth as well. Not leaning into the Frosmoth, knowing that you will have to get a Frosmoth out in the game, but knowing that sort of Inteleon can function for 1 or 2 turns maybe without having to get this Frosmoth out, not playing the full 4/4 line, and like I say, leaning into it is really nice, gaining you some extra space. And yeah, other than that, there's really isn't much to say about this list. It's just super consistent. I've tried it out. It's actually a lot of fun, as well as having very good numbers. Being able to KO 2 Zacians in 1 turn when they can't return KO is really good. Doing really good damage against against Frosmoth, sorry, in combination with the Zigzagoon. Scoop Up Net package, it's really nice. So yeah, definitely give this a go. I think it's one of the more fun decks I've played in this format, to be honest. And it's starting to pick up a bit of traction. I know a couple of people have made videos on it. I know we have as well. So yeah, give this a go. It's a lot of fun and great to see an interesting archetype making top 4. On to another ADP Zacian. Because there's only 16 lists, I'm going to go through all 16, but they will get quicker and quicker as we go down, just because there's less and less variety, because we've seen ADPs for a while now. This time including the Duraludon and the Mawile as sort of Decidueye counters, as well as just being able to guarantee you can try and boss something up on turn 3 with Ultimate Ray. Leaning in a little bit to the turn 1 altered creation with the double energy switch, not fully committed, making space for the 3 crushing hammers, trying to deny the opponent the turn 1 altered creation as much as get it yourself. So yeah, it's a pretty interesting list. The double big charm is definitely relevant for trying to stay alive against Eternatus, Baby Blounds, things like that. Obviously, there's no things like Cape of Toughness are really good on Zacian, but obviously don't work on the ADP. And a lot of the time in these ADP matchups, the matchup is very dependent on whether you're able to knock out the ADP before they can get an ultimate ray off. Since you know you have a turn of grace where they're going to be using the GX attack, so being able to live a couple of extra attacks via the big charm is very key for ADP. But yeah, other than that, nothing crazy. It's not a tag call engine. Instead, it's just the basic energy engine, things like crushing hammers, that kind of thing. Interesting to see the chaotic swells in this build. I've felt, in general, if playing the basic energy build, Viridian is much stronger because you have to find the water early on, but they are instead playing the energy spinner. I've not been a fan of energy spinner, but I can see why it works. So it's kind of a decision between chaotic swell and energy spinner or Viridian Forest. Personally, I'm on the side of Viridian Forest because you can play like 3 Viridian Forest and you don't have to play 4 cards here. But the swell can be super disruptive, especially against fire decks. Denying them Giant Hearth is one of the biggest things that swell is useful for, as well as stopping things like Wonder Lab from ruining your Altered Creation turn. So yeah, again, a pretty interesting list. The Crushing Hammers are probably the most interesting inclusion. Again, I'm not a fan. I'm a fan of just trying to maximize the likelihood of getting the turn to Altered Creation, and Crushing Hammer doesn't do that. It instead slows the opponent down, which is fine. It's just dependent on how you want to sort of build your deck. Do you want to slow the opponents down to then steal Altered Creation first, or did you just want to get the Altered Creation off? So yeah, pretty interesting stuff. Next up, we have the first Centiskorch list from Marco. There was a clean. One was an ability-based list, and one was a welder-based list. In general, again, fairly standard stuff. A lot of these lists are very similar to lists that we saw people testing in the early weeks of this format, especially on things like Tabletop and IRL when this wasn't on PTCGO. Not the full 4-3 Centiskorch, just playing the 3 VMAX, which is interesting. Double Volcanion. I think you can get away with 2 Volcanion with a list like this because you're playing the full 4 com and things like that. Personally, I would probably play 3 over the Victini, but the Victini can be a really nice 2 energy Zacian, being able to deal with Zacian for 2 energy. Whereas even though Volcanion can, you have to have 4 energy on board, whereas the Victini just needs 2. So I can see the use for Victini. Heatran is obviously a really strong card in this meta. Again, being able to knock out an ADP before they Ultimate Ray is a huge breakpoint in the ADP matchup. So having Heatran in the deck to be able to do that is really important, as well as just the usual support Pokemon line. Playing a couple of tag call or tag team supporters. A lot of the time you'll just see sort of the Welder Boss's Orders package, but playing Malolana and Sinlin. Sinlin great for getting back Boss's Orders and Welder. Obviously you don't need to Welder as much in this deck, so you do have time to Sinlin a little bit more. And the Malolana goes, nicely in conjunction with Big Charm and Heat Energy to buff up your Centiskorch VMAX health even more. It basically stops. It never really stops 2-shots because things like Zacian will still always be 2-shotting you, but it can stop awkward 1-shots, as well as being able to keep your Centiskorch alive early against things like Eternatus if they have a little bit of a weaker turn. With Big Charm plus Heat Energy, they still need double Zigzagoon ping as well as 7 Pokemon on the board to be able to knock out Centiskorch. So you can sometimes really try and lean into not having your opponent or trying to get your Centiskorch VMAXs out, because once you get there, obviously Centi VMAX has such a huge HP. Being able to just live a lot of hits, especially in situations where you're able to supplement that with the Big Charm and Heat Energy as well, you can actually make Centiskorch a real big tank. So yeah, pretty interesting stuff. Also keeps things like Victini alive a little bit longer and things like that as well. Other than that, again, a pretty standard list. The double reset stamp is the only thing that isn't particularly common in Centiskorch, I feel. In general, things like third Giant Hearth are more common in my eyes, but double reset stamp is still pretty important. You're only playing 1 Dedenne and you're not playing any research, so having access to stamp, you're usually going to be able to find the stamp when you need it, as long as you're not getting manied every turn. Basically, because you're not discarding your hand with this deck very often, you're just holding a big hand. So double stamp does make a lot more sense in a list with no research and only one Dedenne, because you are often able to punish people with it later on in the game. So yeah, again, a pretty standard list. Most of these lists, in all honesty, are pretty standard, quite similar to some of the ones we've seen in the past. I think probably the slightly stranger thing is just the full inclusion of 4 heat energy. I know some people have been advocates of that card completely, and some haven't at all. But yeah, this is the first of, I think, 3 Eternatus lists, or 4 maybe, 3 or 4. And most Eternatus lists are around 50 cards the same. This first 16 Pokemon are all pretty much the same. 4 boss, 4 Mani, usually 4 research. These 11 to 12 supporter slots are usually pretty similar. This package is usually pretty similar, albeit sometimes 1 more net. And this energy isn't too far off, sometimes a couple of hiding. So in general, the cards we look at are the stadiums, the switching options, and the Pokemon, as well as whether they're playing turbo patches or not. This list is playing the turbo patches. Obviously, Eternatus is another deck that is really key to be able to get your energy down turn 1, to be able to start using Dread End turn 2. So this is how Austin has decided to try and make that happen as often as possible, being able to turbo patch to the Eternatus V on the second turn if an energy was missed on the first turn, which is pretty nice. The double capture energy is nice for getting out extra Eternatus, as well as these 2 Hoopers as well. Hoopers are the tech Pokemon of choice for things like Zamazenta, as well as Decidueye. I'm not the biggest fan of these 2 overall, because I think against Zamazenta you just don't have enough output. Against Decidueye, they're fine. They're not great, but they're not awful. They're just fine. Personally, I'm more of a fan of things like Spiritomb and Sableye, but I think the Hoopers are better Pokemon than Spiritomb and Sableye in all other matchups, because they do way more efficient damage, at least initially. Eventually Spiritomb does. Well, eventually Spiritomb and Sableye both do very efficient damage, but they take a lot more setup, whereas both of the Hoopers, straight out the gate, that is no pun intended, do a lot more efficient damage immediately. So I like the Hoopers as inclusions, just as efficient attackers. I'm not a fan of them as the Soul, Decidueye, and Zamazenta counters, but that's just personal preference, really. And finally, the other notable thing is no switch, but they are playing the double air balloon. Some people lean into the switch count, some people lean into the air balloon and hiding energy count. There's no hiding energy, so the only 2 switching cards in this deck, outside of Scoop Up Nets, I guess, are the air balloons, which is interesting. Things like Paralysis, maybe not as scary in a 16-player tournament where Pikarom or Lightning decks in general didn't seem quite as popular, or didn't seem quite as likely to pop up. Another Eternatus list here, again, super similar. Instead of the turbo patch though, playing the Great Catcher, as well as the double switch, double air balloon as well, and an extra couple of capture energy, but the Pokemon line is the exact same. Flip-flop the research and boss's orders counts. Again, these 11 to 12 supporter slots are almost always identical. Sometimes peers and things like that thrown in as supplementary supporters, but in general, these 3 supporters are always in a 3, sometimes usually the full 4 count of all 3 of them. So yeah, nothing too different, but the Great Catcher, maybe why they're able to drop down to 1 less boss. Into the top 16, that was the top 8. Into the top 16, we have Will Jenkins playing ADP Zacian. This was another pretty interesting list. The full 4 catcher count. Obviously, the supporter count is super low. 4 research, 2 boss. That's it. No Mani, no stamp. That's crazy to me. I think hand disruption can be very important in this format, but Will's philosophy was basically, let's go Jirachi Engine and let's get ahead and stay ahead. Let's always gust the most important Pokemon on our opponent's board. Let's guarantee trying to get this turn 1 ADP with Energy Switch as well as Energy Spinner. No stadiums even, it's just full-on consistency, item-based consistency, and item-based gust, and basically trying to, like I say, get ahead and stay ahead. So yeah, a very interesting way of playing ADP Zacian. We've obviously seen the deck playing catchers in the past, but never have we seen a deck that the deck only playing 4 draw supporters, which is crazy. Maybe you're able to do that a little bit more safely with Crobat in the format now, but yeah, really interesting list. The double cape of toughness, hopefully helpful for the mirror to try and keep your Zacians alive. But yeah, in general, just the full 4 copies of a lot of these cards to try and maximize consistency. And like I say, start off by getting Ultra Creation early and then just start taking prizes here, there, and everywhere. Sam Taylor, a UK player, also played ADP Zacian and again played this sort of turn 1 ADP GX attack package with the 4 energy switch, triple turbo patch, 4 saucer, and double spinner, as well as 1 Viridian. So really leaning into trying to get that turn 1 GX attack. Still a couple of key tech Pokemon like Mawile, Duraludon, and Zamazenta. Triple Marnie and the full 4 bosses orders instead of 3 in a great catch or anything like that. And yeah, again, nothing too crazy, just really, like I say, leaning into trying to get Ultra Creation turn 1, or even just trying to set up Zacian's turn 1 and start using Brave Blade as soon as possible. Pretty interesting stuff. The third Eternatus list of the day was also running the Sableye in complement to Hoopers, only playing the Evil Admonition Hooper instead of the Assault Gate one. This is playing the One Pierce. One Pierce has always been very interesting to me. Being able to find it on the key turns does seem awkward, but because you can use it in combination with Crobat as a draw supporter, it's more than just a random Pierce, which is nice. Interestingly, 1 drill, 1 reset stamp. Again, with things, this deck really likes to research quite early and then go into the boss Crobat sort of line of play. So having these one-off counts is a little bit scary to me because if any of them are caught up in your early turns, especially Dangerous Drill, sometimes you don't want to be discarding Pokemon because you want them on your bench in the early game to be able to attack with Dread End for knockouts. So Dangerous Drill is a bit strange as a one-off to me, but I don't mind it necessarily just because there will be key situations, especially against things like Aurora energy-based ADPs, things like that. Any mirrors that they attach a special energy turn 1, you're able to punish. So yeah, I don't hate the 1 Dangerous Drill, but 1 to me is always a little bit scary. Cards like Reset Stamp and Dangerous Drill, to me, I always like as 2 counts because if you find them early, they're sometimes useless. Whereas, well, I guess less so with Dangerous Drill, but especially with Reset Stamp, early Reset Stamps are usually pretty useless, so they just end up going in the bin. So I'm more on board with the 1 Dangerous Drill, I get that. The 1 Reset Stamp to me, though, is a little bit spooky. But yeah, other than that, again, fairly standard triple capture, with the 1 hiding this time, 4 switch and 1 air balloon as well, so plenty of switching outs in case things like poison, things like paralysis were an issue. Another wacky list was Decidueye Obstagoon, played by Alex. Really interesting list, the 313 Deci as well as the 202 Obstagoon, basically trying to force the opponent to have answers to whichever annoying stage 2 you decide to build up. Obviously, stage 2 decks feel a bit high rolly right now, have felt high rolly for a little while, so you really have to believe in the heart of the cards to play a deck like this, but things like Rosa can definitely supplement that, and the nature of these 2 Pokemon being sort of wally in certain aspects does mean that your opponents are slowed down to an extent as well for you to try and set these Pokemon up, so that's pretty interesting. Goon is really key in certain matchups. Things like ADP Zacian, they don't have an answer to Goon outside of just being able to Mawile and bench stuff. So Goon is really, really strong in the ADP Zacian matchups. But obviously, the more VMAX matchups we see, Obstagoon gets a bit worse. That's where the Decidueye comes in. Decidueye is really good for walling VMAXs. But in general, most VMAX decks are adding a counter to Decidueye. So that's where the Goon comes in again. And basically, you'll switch between these 2 stage 2s whilst placing damage counters down with things like Headbutt Tantrum and Untamed Shout, as well as dealing damage with Obstruct to try and deal with your opponent's Decidueye answers and then lock them out of the game with Decidueye. So early on, you're going to be using probably 1 Decidueye to bait out the answer, then the Obstagoons to knock out the answer, and then closing the game out with Decidueye because they have no answers left. So yeah, pretty interesting strategy. Obviously, one stage 2 right now is kind of spooky, so double stage 2s is super spooky. Sometimes can be difficult to set these guys up, but obviously worked out pretty well. And in general, like I say, you have to be consistent with decks like this because double stage 2s are so inconsistent. You have to really pad out these counts of Pokemon search, of the rare candy, of supporters. So yeah, nothing too surprising here. Not much space for maneuverability. One turf field, one Viridian, being able to search out the key energy on the right turns. Obviously, these also having different energy costs can be a little bit awkward at times, but definitely interesting to see a deck like this come forward. And then rounding out the top 16, we have another Centiskorch first. This was a greens-based Centiskorch list, which is pretty interesting. Obviously, it's kind of like Greenzard 2.0. We saw Greenzard do very well for a while in Standard this time last year, a little bit before perhaps. And this is like Greenzard 2.0, basically the full greens and welder package, as well as now having Boss and Research to supplement the draw. Interestingly, there's no sort of surge combos in here. We've recently seen a list come forward with Magneton and Surge, played recently, mainly by Tord, I believe, on ladder. So there's definitely legs to this archetype. And this is kind of, I guess, where things sort of began with this kind of list. And I feel I have seen a lot more of this on ladder recently. Green decks are always a bit inconsistent, especially as you're not the biggest fan of going first. Especially you're already not the biggest fan of going first because you want a Volcanion Flare starter if you can, but you also want to go first because you can't. You also want to go second, sorry, because you can't greens on turn 1 anymore. So this really leans into going second. Most of the time that should be fine because most decks at the moment want to go first anyway. So you should be able to go second or choose to go second. So it's not the biggest downside, but in general, if you're forced to go first, or if you don't have a particularly strong turn 1, going second, you can really be punished by a deck like this. But in general, I've always struggled to play greens decks. I'm not the greatest greens player in the world. I do want to try this deck out a bit more though, and I will have to really put some more time into it. But it's again really interesting to see decks like this doing well. Obviously, with a greens engine, you get to play some of these wackier cards, things like 1 Hyper Potion, Scrapper, 1 Vitality Band for certain situations. Just being able to play these random one-offs for the key situations is pretty nice. So yeah, really interesting deck. Daniel brought something pretty interesting to the table. It was a shame to not see it go a little bit further, but I will have to definitely try that out a bit more. Tamao Cameron, one of my teammates from CCG, was the final Eternatus to round out the top 16, playing a huge variety of extra Pokemon, the double Hooper, as well as 1 Yveltal, which has free retreat, as well as 1 Absol to try and stop things like Air Balloon being too important, as well as just trying to trap things active. It's pretty interesting. The Yveltal is a pretty nice inclusion, obviously playing the Switch build as opposed to the Air Balloon build, so the Yveltal makes a bit more sense, as well as triple Hiding Energy. Being able to combo Hiding Energy and Yveltal with Switch basically should give you almost, flexibility of movement almost all game. You have so many ways of moving. So yeah, pretty interesting stuff. Other than that, again, nothing too crazy. A few more special energy than other builds. Maybe a little bit weaker to Dangerous Drill, obviously playing the drill of his own. Maybe a little bit weaker to Dangerous Drill, but at the same time you have the Viridian plus 5 special dark, 5 basic dark anyway, so you still have the option to do that early game. So yeah, again, nothing crazy. The interesting count to me is probably the 2 Scoop Up Net. Scoop Up Net feels very important in certain situations, so maybe being able to bump this up to 4 would be cool, but in general, like I say, the core is still the same with all of these Eternatus decks. The core is the same. These 16 Pokemon, these 12 supporters, or 12 supporter slots, this sort of 10 Ball Search package, and then the rest, sort of the tech Pokemon and that kind of thing, is up for debate. So yeah, you can see some similarities through all 4 of these Eternatus lists. Basically, 45 of these, 45 cards of these decks are all pretty much rock solid. Rounding out is another couple of ADP Zacian decks. First up is Tim, who is playing only... The craziest thing to me about this list is there's no switch. There's 4 air balloon, but there are no switch, which is pretty crazy. In general, I was thinking about this, and I do understand it. If you start with anything but ADP, you have free retreat via an air balloon, and if you're starting ADP, that's fine because you want ADP in the active. So I get it, but I think switch is so important for situations outside of getting that turn 1 auto creation, being able to chain Brave Blade, being able to just switch out of a damaged ADP or something like that, just to give yourself a turn of breathing room. It's so important to be able to do those kind of things. So 4 air balloon and no switch to me is a little scary. I get it, and I get the thought process of the only thing I want in turn 1, in my active turn 1, is ADP, and that works in the 4 air balloon case. But I think switch is so integral to the deck that personally I would want to find space for a couple of switches myself. Again, the full ADP combo: 1 Viridian, 2 Spinner, 3 Turbo Patch, and then the 4 energy switch. So yeah, really looking for that turn 1 ADP GX attack. And finally, we have 1 more ADP Zacian, Tyson, again playing the full 4 count of Turbo Patch, energy switch, trying to really get that turn 1 GX. Slightly smaller supporter count, not supporter count, slightly smaller Pokemon count, sorry, in order to try and do that as well as just the double Marnie, saving some space for a couple of these other cards. Triple Cape of Toughness, the Great Catcher, as well as 4 Boss. You know, pretty standard stuff. But yeah, other than that, obviously there was only 16 players lists to go through. That's why I went through all of them. Normally I would just look at a few key ones, but pretty interesting stuff. We can see already that the meta has started evolving from this over the past couple of weeks, but I thought it'd be interesting to take a look back and see what did well. But yeah, other than that, thank you very much for watching. I've been Jack from OmniPoke, and I look forward to seeing you guys in another video.